Greetings, and thank you for joining us for another SANS ICS Concept Overview. I'm Don C. Weber of Cutaway Security and a certified SANS instructor. Today we're joined by Peter Jackson, a cybersecurity engineer out of New Zealand and a SANS instructor for the ICS 515 ICS Active Defense and Incident Response course. He's here to provide us with an introduction to the Open Platform Communication Protocol, often referred to as OPC. If you enjoyed this video and the topics we cover in the SANS ICS Concept Overview, please be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment if you have a question about this topic or suggestions for future content. Okay, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. Today we're joined by Peter Jackson, a cybersecurity engineer out of New Zealand, and also a SANS instructor with the SANS ICS team. He's here to provide us with an introduction to Open Platform Communications Protocol, often referred to as OPC. So, Peter, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and then go ahead and get into talking about OPC.
Sure, thanks, Don. And again, I love the efforts that you're putting into the community here with these initiatives. So really happy to be coming along and helping you out here.
Thank you.
So my background is a control systems engineer. And when we kind of were talking about doing something for the community, OPC was one of those things that we still see pretty ubiquitously around the place. Something that I quite often used to program as a control system engineer before we kind of moved into the OT security space. At the moment, I look after the OT security team here at SGS in New Zealand, and we've got a kind of a mix of engineers and consultants that come in and kind of layer in this really good OT security practice for industrial control system environments and things.
That's pretty exciting. That's a part of it. I mean, I'm so in and out of organizations so fast. Sometimes I don't get to hang around to watch them fix things, and so I'm certainly excited that you're able to. It sounds like your team is able to do that.
Yeah, we have a lot of fun.
Awesome, excellent.
And so, OPC is just one of those things that's been around for a while. I've actually got some slides here from the ICS 515 material. I'll bring that up just to kind of set that context, and hopefully you can see that now there, Don.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Awesome, mate. So, as I said, OLE for process control is what it used to be called, Open Platform Communications, and it's a really great capability for different systems to be able to talk to each other. Again, this universal translator. We talk a lot about different protocols in ICS. OPC is one of those data-rich protocols where you get to see the tag, description, timestamps, and all sorts of other things around gathering data, around sharing data between systems. And again, because it's an open standard, then you can have different DCS, HMIs, and SCADA systems talking OPC from different vendors, but able to use that same language and have that rich exchange of data, as opposed to something like Modbus, which is just kind of tags and values. So it's a really great protocol for sharing there, and it has come a long way. It's been around for a long time. I think the first OPC kind of classic came out in '96. OPC UA is a newer OPC, which has actually been around for about 15 years, but it's still not as widely used. We're going to be talking about OPC Classic quite a lot more today.
Okay.
And again, it's quite often used, as I say, around sharing data and bringing data from either a PLC or HMI or DCS system, something that's kind of lower in our Purdue model quite often, and whether it's kind of sharing data across to a safety instrument system or up into a process historian or alarm management. We've got this capability to be able to share that data across systems as we talked about.
So is OPC mainly used for just for kind of a view into the process, or is it also used for control?
So you can do reads and writes through OPC. In our experience, quite often OPC is generally used in that read-only mode to be able to get data across. If you're going to be doing some writes, you might put that on a different channel and have that capability maybe to set bypasses, overrides, or similar from our control system into our safety system. Again, where we're getting data out of the environment, again, this digitization, where we want to increase our data flow from our ICS up into our IT environment. we're looking for a read-only capability, but of course, OPC Classic is you're reliant on the application-dependent configuration of that to prevent those writes. So it can be a bit tricky, but quite often it's used as a read-only. It's got that capability of write. And kind of digging in deeper, the OPC UA, which again has been around for a long time, but we don't see a lot of use, has a bit more capabilities around that read-write side. For the Classic, there's 3 different implementations. One's the data access, where you're actually looking at current time of tags, parameters, values. What is the value of that pressure transmitter? Is that valve open or closed? Is the pump running or stopped? And then we've got our historical data access. What was the level of that tank over the last 2 hours or 2 days or 2 years, potentially? And then we've got the alarm and events, which again, we were looking at a process alarm, like our 62682 style alarming for high level and plant trip and things like that. So there's a few different ways you can slice and dice how OPC is getting data out of the environment.
So if it's mainly used for monitoring purposes, does that mean that the application, whatever they're running in there, is probably going to turn to some other industrial protocol for the control? In other words, it's getting information, it's to serve it either up to the historian or to HMIs, but if there's some control aspect, then you would expect to see another industrial control deployed within that environment. Is that true?
Yeah, potentially. Some of the implementations that we've seen, again, we're based in Taranaki in New Zealand, a lot of oil and gas. And so we might see like a DCS, a control system, which has all of its native DCS protocols between the operator workstations, engineering workstations, and DCS controllers. And so that's all kind of native protocols and amongst that DCS environment. Similar for a SCADA system, you've got all that kind of native backbone communications going across the place. But we want to share from the control system out to other systems. And again, kind of that alarms, the process historian, or maybe the enterprise historian, and maybe for a safety instrumented system where we want to read what's going on in the safety, have a view of the safety system. But obviously, we're not looking to do a lot of control there. Where we do want to write things into the safety system, we obviously need to be really mindful of how we're segmenting and how we're managing that interface. And sometimes that's just hardwired signals from the control system to the safety system. So we don't have any write comms back into the safety system. Maybe we might just have, as I said, a different channel where we have maybe Modbus writes or something, so that we're, again, segmenting how we use the protocols so that they can't be abused in any way, shape or form.
Okay, I appreciate you answering my questions. Thank you.
Sure. So it can be a really interesting thing. You see on the slide there where we talk about the OPC server and client applications. In this implementation, we've got the server and the client sitting on the same box. And again, OPC Classic, that's using a Microsoft COM protocol. Again, one of the reasons that OPC UA came out was that heavy reliance on COM and DCOM, where we do see this kind of split across kind of 2 different areas. If maybe this is sitting across 2 different Windows boxes, maybe on the same LAN segment, maybe on a separate LAN segment, this is where we get into this firewall unfriendly nature of OPC Classic, and we've got to open up a lot of ports. We kind of see that in a bit of a packet capture here from our course material, where we're looking at our DCE RPC to kind of try to identify OPC on the wire, because it does use quite a full range of ports. Usually it can be picked up on the wire using DCE and RPC, which again is that underlying architecture around that DCOM. So yeah, firewall unfriendly. Generally, you can use OPC tunnelers if you want to look at a more secure implementation. Again, the support of OPC UA, even though it's a 15-year-old protocol, as I'm sure you appreciate, a lot of control systems out there are still at least 15 years old or older. And again, that support for new protocols and wanting to try something new, even though it's 15 years old, is pretty hesitant. There's always that culture and control systems. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
So we still see quite a lot of OPC Classic around the place.
And this is kind of one of those instances where there is a more secure version of the industrial protocol, but it would require you change out all the devices and all of the management servers to implement that correctly, right?
Yeah, potentially. Sometimes it's a minor version update or a major version update. Sometimes there's a licensing aspect to it. So your system may be licensed for OPC Classic, but not OPC UA. Again, moving to that secure mode or that secure protocol, I think is a really good thing, but making sure that you've got that justification in place to say, look, this is part of that insurance policy. This is part of that. Hey, we want to make sure that we're doing things a little bit better, closing our aperture on our firewalls. We see that quite a lot in our OT engineering practice to say, hey, look, these firewall rules are pretty wide open. How can we close the aperture and reduce our exposure without actually compromising our business? And using an OPC tunneler or OPC UA allows us to be able to do that. Allows us to reduce our attack surface on our control system from that preventative perspective.
Awesome.
So I think one of those things there is understanding around what OPC is used for in the environment, how that's used. As I said, by design, OPC Classic doesn't have a lot of capabilities to be able to flag reads and writes as you would like for Modbus or DMP3 and similar. So you can't actually see on the wire what the application's doing. Again, it's just a lot of not proprietary, but encoded communications for OPC Classic. And then if we get into OPC UA, we do get some more of that AAA, that identification and things that allows us to have a more securable protocol, have a bit more securable comms, and again, close our firewall rules down quite tight. You and I know we've talked about the value and the pros and cons of encryption on the wire, where we're looking at communications and whether that's going to add some value or becomes this silver bullet syndrome. I think that's a really interesting debate that we won't get into here. But understanding how those things are communicating is super important. And also kind of the legacy, because again, if I kind of go back to the good old days where I was a control system engineer, quite often when you're setting up OPC, especially if I go back to this last slide here, where we've got the server and the client sitting across different LAN segments or even on the same LAN segment or different segments, it was always quite frustrated to try and get these things talking. Again, it's open platform communications, but how we used to refer to it as Please Connect for OPC, because it can be quite a frustrating protocol to get going. And so there's a tendency to turn off security controls, allow anonymous communications and things, just so that it will start talking. And of course, once it's talking, you just kind of back away. Just leave it alone. And from a control systems perspective, it's good because everything's working and you've achieved, and the project's able to go into the next phase and things. And of course, kind of coming on later, kind of 10 years later, and looking back at some of those implementations, and we go, hey, there's a better way. Let's understand this a little bit more. Let's have a bit more security by design, even for this insecure by design communications, and understand how we can set these things up in a secure way and still make it reliable.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as we're talking about this, I think about the, I just wrote a script, the SAW script, to try to reduce some of the Windows services, to reduce that attack surface. And that would probably absolutely break an OPC server or like workstation if it was deployed on that, because of it turning off the Windows systems. It would have to be. It would be interesting to test that to see how it affects the OPC server end of it or the client software. But I digress. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. And again, there's some great things out there. I'm sure many of the audience will be familiar with Pi, OSI Pi, now owned by Aviva. They use OPC quite a lot, or that's quite often enables this Pi data historian capability. Again, they've got some really great secure implementation guides for how to deploy Pi securely in your system and how to set up these communications in a secure way. Obviously, it relies on those system integrators, those owner operators, whoever the controls engineer or whoever that person is, to come in and actually follow the secure deployment guides, because it's one thing having a secure deployment guide, it's another thing actually using the secure deployment guide. So I certainly advocate people going out there, not only to OSI Pi, but to whoever your vendor is, to look at, okay, how can we move from a less secure to a more secure implementation? Understanding that, again, this isn't going to solve all your problems, but this can quite often be one of those exposure places, especially if we're using this, again, to get data out to the enterprise environment. And so if we're communicating OPC across that boundary between OT and IT, hey, how can we kind of reduce that threat aperture? How can we reduce the exposure? And again, we saw this, the reason that we kind of talk about this a little bit more is around Havocs. And in the Havoc's case study, the adversary kind of used and misused this insecure by design OPC classic, kind of over 2,000 different victims that we know of. And it was, again, OPC enum and establishing new OPC communications, learning the environment, again, that same capability of the data-rich protocol that is OPC, and especially OPC DA, where you're reaching in and saying, not only what is this parameter value, but now I've got a parameter value, a parameter tag name, a parameter description. And so I know far more about that data with the context. And so again, gathering that information, again, a few different theories about what that Havoc's, the adversary that used Havoc's or misused OPC in this case to do. And again, we talk about this a bit more in 515, but we certainly know that adversaries know about OPC. We certainly know that adversaries can kind of misuse it. And because of that, we should really be on the lookout for how that's happening in our environment and how we can better secure things in our environment. And of course, not only from that protect, but also that detect side, where can we see potentially new OPC communications being established, new DCE OPC on the wire, again, looking at a host-based detection and seeing what new connectivity is established and things.
We've talked about network flow a little bit. This is obviously a network protocol, and the communications from specific devices. These communications should only be going from the communications should be starting from one known location and going to another location. So any type of new devices that are making those queries, kind of like you were talking about with the Havoc's communications, a piece of malware that started infected systems and then started making OPC calls that potentially from systems that aren't one of those typical endpoints. We should be noticing this and responding to that. I guess in your experience in New Zealand, did you have cases that your team assisted with the Havoc's malware infections?
Not specifically on Havoc's, but again, from an incident response perspective. So if we look at OPC in the context of incident response and understanding, okay, we're now in this mindset to say something weird is happening across our environment. How does OPC relate? Is this being used or misused? Is this just another standard insecure by design OPC implementation? Or is this one that maybe has been established by an adversary and that Havoc's like capability? Having a look at that, understanding baselines is always going to be really key. And I think, again, we talk about this in incident response as part of 515, that kind of 90% of incident response is that preparation and being aware of what you have. Again, that identify as a really foundational element of really good cybersecurity practice. And so knowing what OPC communications are normal in the environment will really help you and go a long way to understand what's abnormal. Because if you haven't done that baseline ahead of time, it's really hard to reverse engineer what's normal and what's abnormal in that incident response scenario. So I think kind of first thing around OPC and incident response is know before you get there. do that preparation ahead of time, again, with your owner operator, whether you're that system integrator or that incident response, kind of supporting that OTIR process. Knowing what OPC communications are normal is really key. And if you haven't been able to do that and look at the wire and look at the endpoints and look at the environment, having that engagement with the engineering and operations to say what OPC is in use here, what are you expecting, should we expecting to find? Again, finding additional connections or additional uses of OPC, again, using that same OPC server and OPC client, we might have OPC DA, HDA, and AE all running across that same communications pair, but one or two of those might be usual and one of them might be unusual. We did a red team exercise recently where it was looking at OPC client it was actually the server was sitting in the ITDMZ and polling using OPC AE from our OT environment with a few different controls around that, but it was only using OPC AE for alarm events because that was part of their alarm events management system. And so if we started to see some OPC DA communications happening across those same endpoints, we might look at, again, going a bit deeper into understanding what requirement is there for DA, either from a read perspective or a read-write perspective, to understand that in that incident response scenario.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I appreciate the the starting of the breakdown of OPC. Certainly, I can only imagine that there is so much more to understand about this. But the way you talked about the expectation of what's going to be communicating within the control environments, how it's going to be communicating, the fact that you're going to see different implementations, both the older, probably less secure version because of legacy issues. We're going to find those. We're going to experience those out there, but also there are alternatives, especially for our greenfields, our newer environments. We should be expecting to see some of those OPC UA implementations, hopefully with some of the secure configurations. But it's going to be a case by case, organization by organization. Their maturity of their security program is really going to define it. I appreciate that, Peter. First of all, do you have any final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I do encourage, again, people in the OT space to understand a bit more about OPC. Again, this is still quite used, especially in classic mode. Again, UA, it's only 15 years old, so we might start to see some field implementations creeping in. Certainly head up OPC Foundation. They're the ones that look after OPC from an open standard perspective. And they've also, one of the OPC Foundation members is the OPC Training Institute. Not only have they got some OPC training, but they've actually got some tools like OPC Expert that you can use to understand OPC communications. Again, quite often used from an engineering perspective to establish that OPC communications, what around my COM or DCOM settings isn't set up correctly, what do I need to turn off from a security perspective to be able to establish communications. But again, we can use that same OPC Expert utility to be able to look at the security of these communications and see if we can right size that. Again, making sure that we've got all that nice service level access and a really good positive mindset around how we're securing these systems. So I encourage people to check out those two things.
Excellent. Well, I'll make sure that we collaborate, we get them in the show notes, and so that people can be directed to the right spots. So, Peter, where can people find you, both personally and for your job?
SGS ECL. So we're eclcyber.co.nz. We're a separate business unit from our automation side of the business. So that's where we've got a lot of OT stuff there. Again, people can hit me up on LinkedIn, Peter Jackson. I'm sure if you search Peter Jackson in New Zealand, there'll be a few of us, but I'm sure they'll be able to find me. So yeah, hitting me up on LinkedIn is probably the best one. Send me a message or whatever.
Awesome. Well, Peter, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming over on here and giving us a quick overview of OPC and encouraging everybody to go out and get some more training on this so that they understand the different things that are necessary to understand for implementation. So thank you very much for your time and have a great week.
You too. Thanks, Don.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to another concept overview with the SANS ICS and Cutaway security teams. Please let us know if there are other topics you would like us to cover in the comments below. If you enjoyed the content, please be sure to like and subscribe to the SANS ICS YouTube channel. This has been Don C. Weber of Cutaway Security. Go forth and do good things.